Do you ever ask yourself, am I playing too small? Have I left it too late to start afresh? Will I come to the end of my life and feel that I somehow let myself down? This is your invitation to hear from some amazing people who have asked themselves those very same questions and chose to wake the F up, to get off the hamster wheel of mediocrity and seize the life that was calling them. Be inspired and be challenged to discover who you have the potential to become and the contribution you're here to make. And now, here to guide you on the most important quest of your life is your host, Janet Hogan.
Do you ever find yourself in one of those wallowing moments where you genuinely feel sorry for yourself and you don't know how to get out of that funk? Well, you're about to hear from someone who has every reason in the world to wallow in his particular brand of misfortune. He's endured some of the toughest challenges life could ever throw at you, including over 2,000 surgeries from which his body carries thousands of scars. He knows what it's like to suffer from muscular dystrophy, strokes, heart attacks, high blood pressure, osteoarthritis, skin cancer. He's had both a kidney transplant and a pancreas transplant and gone through the trials of organ rejection. And today he lives with chronic pneumonia. He's 100% deaf in his right ear and nearly as deaf in the other. The list of obstacles this human pincushion has confronted brings to mind an image of a steeplechase constantly having to face one hurdle after another, where on any day he wakes up not knowing if it's going to be an okay day or yet another one that will see him end up on a hospital stretcher. But as brutal as these health challenges have been, they're not the toughest challenge he's had to face. His greatest obstacle is one that goes way deeper than any surgeon's knife. And to share with us what that was and his enormous journey to overcome it, I'm very honoured to welcome Don Woodring, CEO of Mentorship.CLUB, to Wake the F Up. Don, welcome.
Thank you so much, Janet. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank you. And, you know, before we go to this greatest challenge that I mentioned, anyone listening to that intro must be wondering, but how can any single person be struck by so many serious ailments in one lifetime? Can you share with us, Don, what happened to you in your childhood that resulted in so many health issues later on in your life?
Sure. First of all, I never even told my personal story until this last Christmas. So even my best friends did not know about my story. I just published it last Christmas. So, and that's part of the reason me even creating this Mentorship.CLUB business. So anyway, my family was a little unusual, as all families are. My mom was a drug addict and an alcoholic. She took all of us kids out to live in a place called Compton or Watts, California, where a lot of bad things happened to us. I mean, really pretty seriously bad things. But my father then later came out and brought us back to Pennsylvania, where we were raised. And at that time, I remember I had an aunt who kept telling my parents that I was diabetic and that they should get me checked out. But where I grew up, particularly if you're a guy, you just don't go to the hospital. So a lot of those were as a result of that, by not taking care of the diabetes.
And Don, you said some pretty dark things happened to you in your childhood. Are you happy to share what those things were?
Sure. So when we went out to California, my mom obviously was, as I said, an alcoholic and a drug addict. And she used to take us kids to bars when we were maybe 5, 6, 7. My two older sisters and I were born in 30 months. So we were really very close together. Then my younger brother was born 4 years after I was. So she used to take us to bars and drink. And she used to, when she took us out to California, we used to go to sex and drug parties. There was incest. There was, a lot of, even I hate the word sexual abuse, but there was a lot of sexual abuse and those kinds of things. So those are some of the darkest things. And then in addition, my sister and I, when we used to walk to school, we used to have kids that were much, much older than us take knives to our throats for our lunch money. So it was that kind of environment.
Wow, so you really grew up in a tough neighborhood. And I imagine a lot of what you just recounted, maybe you weren't aware of for a large part of your life. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely correct. So in fact, I was 33. When I was a younger guy, I'd say like 16 to 18, I had a horrible temper. Now, if you knew anybody who's known me for the last, say, 30 years, they would not believe that I had a bad temper. But I think that was all part of that because I didn't really recognize it and really accept it.
Mm. So that repressed rage that comes bubbling to the surface at the slightest trigger. Yeah, that's
Yes,
mm.
yeah, I'd say you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. I when we had a chat before doing this interview, you mentioned to me that you came from a family, and I'm sure many people will relate to this, that hated confrontation, hated hearing the truth, weren't great at communication. And so that really provided, I feel, a context, if you like, for what would become the greatest obstacle that you had to encounter. You know, all the health issues aside, the thing that was probably your biggest personal challenge. Can you speak to us about that, Don?
Sure. So, for example, in my family, telling the truth or saying anything that happened inside our family, pardon me, was really forbidden. In fact, that's happened to me a couple of times where my mother would take me aside and tell me, do never say anything again about that. What happens in our house stays in our house. And that's the environment we grew up in. And then later, with all those medical issues, I was pretty good at compartmentalizing. So I think that's how I got through all of the sexual stuff earlier on and the incest and those things, because I just compartmentalized those. But in terms of solutions, I also compartmentalized solutions. So I think that was one of the ways I was able to get around that. Now, the other thing was I grew up in central Pennsylvania and I was an athlete. And I knew I was gay since I was 13. But in my family, there was no way you could be gay. You just couldn't be gay. And in our society or in our culture in central Pennsylvania, in our little town, you cannot be an athlete and be gay. I wasn't going to give up sports. My father used the N word and the F word in the gay vernacular very frequently. So there was just no way I could have come out. If I would have come out, my parents clearly would have sent me away for electric shock therapy and the whole conversion reparation therapy.
Wow. You describe your life as being a transformation from human question mark to exclamation mark. I want to know how you got to becoming an exclamation mark. You've just created a backdrop that anyone would feel absolutely demoralizing and diminishing. So how did you get to where you're at today, Don?
Well, I truthfully, in all honesty, I think I'm the luckiest man in the world. I mean, I don't think anybody could look at my background and say I'm not that luckiest guy in the world. But I was so lucky professionally. That's if we just talk about the professional side for a minute. I was so lucky that in spite of all those obstacles, I still won 3 state championships. I still took third in another championship in the state. I was selected for a scholarship to study abroad. I was selected by a Fortune 500 company as their top national recruit. And then I became a country manager when I was 29 and a CEO of a public company when I was 29. And in a large part, that was thanks to some of the best mentors that I had. And these were guys who were former CEOs and chairmen of Fortune 500 companies. They're really some of the brightest men I know. So I think that has done a lot to help my career achieve and be able to achieve the things I had.
So yeah, I really get that. But what about this? It feels like it was this lurking shadow that must have been weighing heavily on you since the age of 13. What was the point where you allowed that that part of you to break open? What was the catalyst for that?
That's a great question. An excellent question is one I have the answer for, but a great question is the one you just asked, which I don't have the answer for. I mean, I know the answer, but I don't have it prepared. After I got divorced from my ex-wife, which had nothing to do with the fact that I was gay, I still was dating women. I still tried to date women because it was just mentally and emotionally very difficult for me to accept the fact that I was gay. Then one day I had this guy who asked me out on a date. And it took me back, it really set me back on my heels, but I accepted and we went out on a date. And then he really became my first boyfriend. So that was the catalyst for that. And then what happened was, shortly after that took place, I decided to come out of the closet to my family and my close friends. And then it took me a full year after I came out of the closet to really accept the fact that I was gay, and that was okay.
Mm. It's,
so it was a big burden.
No, I just love the fact that you're prepared to share this, because I know that so many people are living in that space of shame and fear. And what I hear when you share that, we all have different journeys, don't we? Different paths. We all have different sources of shame, I believe. Whether it's our sexual orientation, or feeling a failure on a business level, or failure as a parent, or whatever it is, we have this dark secret, I think, that we're custodians of. And then our choice is, do we continue to allow fear to rule our life? Or at some point, do we, listen to the heart, get out of that headspace and listen to the heart and let love rule? And that's what I hear when you share that story, that love was just speaking too loud. Is that right?
Yeah, it certainly was. And then I just had another boyfriend, and then I had a boyfriend for about 6 years. So that was kind of the progress there. But the other thing I think is important to note, that the public company that I ran was as industrial a business as you can get. So they were not very gay friendly. I never would have gotten that job if I would have been an out gay man, never in a million years, which means it had nothing to do with your talent and everything to do with your sexual orientation. And so the fear that you mentioned just a second ago, the fear really drove me, and drives, I think, a lot of people, even today, which is unfortunate, but it's just a reality.
Yeah, I totally hear that. As you know, I do work with shadow integration, and what fascinates me about that is that we tend to have a dark side which we're scared of just because we don't know it. And in actual fact, it really is nothing to be scared of. The fear itself is the delusion. But because that fear is so compelling, it drives us into what I call the overcompensating self. And that overcompensating self can actually achieve a lot. It can achieve great things. The problem is it's not very sustainable. It does require almost superhuman effort. And so at some point, I think our system, whether it's our physical system or our emotional, mental system, or even our spiritual system, there's enough already. I just want my life to feel a little bit easier, to happen without so much effort. We hear people say, I just want to be in my flow and find peace. And I think that's where we start to gravitate to that it is a natural gravity point, that central position. Because, our darkest thoughts about ourselves aren't true, and nor are our probably most hyperinflated thoughts. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. I'd love to, I'm a great fan of practical tools and guided steps, because I think in this space, most of us feel so lost. And so many people feel stuck and really just don't know how to move forward with their lives. And you shared with me these 9 steps, Don, that you followed and that you promote. Could you run through those? And anyone listening, I encourage you just to get a piece of paper and a pen to scribble these down, because I think it's a great recipe for getting to becoming a human exclamation mark. So could you share those with us, Don?
Sure. And these have taken me years and years and years to get through, and then to amalgamate them into a certain number of steps and those kinds of things. But the very first one, and most of these are not in sequential order, but the very first one is the first thing you have to do, which is acceptance. So, like I said, I was able to accept all of those medical issues that I had with pretty much ease. So the diabetes, I said, where's the toughest place to give a shot? They said, your stomach. That's the first shot I took. All of those things. But the toughest one for me to accept, as we just mentioned, was the fact that I was gay. So I think acceptance is a huge point, and it's got to be the first thing that you do. The second thing is really your attitude. You've got to really take an attitude towards something in a more positive light, even though it may not be a positive thing. So, for example, probably the biggest adjustment I had was when I lost my hearing in my right ear. I'm completely deaf in my right ear, and I've lost a lot of hearing in my left ear. And I used to sing. So for me, that was a pretty big deal. And typically I only give myself like a certain period of time, which is typically like 15 or 30 minutes to kind of get over it. But that one took me a couple of days. So, and I think that's another important point here is these are things that work for me and timelines that work for me. But I also think that it's important that the people do what's right for them. In fact, right now I'm writing a book about these 9 steps right now. So the other thing is sense of humor. I think sense of humor really is not in any way to degrade or to discount what's happened to you, but you've got to maintain a good sense of humor about everything. The other thing is to keep things in perspective. You know, a lot of people forget to keep things in perspective, and that's one thing I learned very young, and I always try and do. So for example, in my case, my muscular dystrophy is an annoyance. But even with that, I was able to win 3 state championships. So, you know, I didn't let it affect me in many ways, but that's because of my attitude and my perspective. It wasn't going to kill me. And that's the way I looked at a lot of these things in the future. Were they going to kill me or not? The other thing that's important is that somebody maintains a support group there to support you through the good and the bad. And I can tell you this, you will find out very quickly who are your true friends and really there to support you and who won't. The other thing is to not blame others. It's easy to blame other people. Like, for example, with my health issues, I could easily look at my parents and blame them, or not coming out of the closet, I could easily blame my parents. But what I do is I put timelines in perspective. It wasn't until 1978 that the American Medical Association said that being gay wasn't a mental issue. And they used to show us films in middle school and high school about what they would do to gay men. And it was horrible, really horrific. So the other thing is not to blame other people. The other thing I think that's important is you have to have a drive to improve constantly. If you don't have that drive to constantly improve, it's kind of like a business that doesn't have sales. You can't just maintain your top line. You've got to always grow your top line. I think it's the same kind of a thing. So, and then the other thing is, there are 2 other things. One is never be a victim. I mean, a lot of people say to me that why, you know, I was such a victim. I completely discount that. I think there's a huge difference in recognizing that you were victimized and acting and being a victim. I refuse to be a victim. I will not be a victim. Now, it took me a long time to realize and to accept the fact that I was victimized, but that's totally different than being a victim. And then the other thing is really just never to give up. You just can't give up. I mean, the time that you give up is really that's when everything goes away. You know, everything goes away if you give up. So you just got to continue to fight. And sometimes that's hard. So sometimes you have to regroup, and sometimes you need to say, I'm going to take a day to get my thoughts back on track, or to get my perspective right, or to get my goals in shape, or whatever it is. But you've got to just not give up. You've got to be committed to that. So those are the 9 steps.
There, thank you so much for sharing that. And you are the living, breathing example of those steps. And yeah, I totally, I feel with it's interesting, isn't it? What makes a victim and what makes someone who is not a victim? And it's not really, I think you're being judged on what's happened to you, but not how you've responded to it. What's happened to you might sound like a recipe for being a victim, but it hasn't created a victim of you, from what I see, at all.
Correct.
You are, what would be the word, from victim to victor or banker. You know, you're someone who goes, yeah, give me the blow, and now here's how I respond to it. It's really the response, isn't it, that defines whether you're a victim or not.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's the whole mentality piece.
Yeah. And I remember being in that victim space. I mean, my life compared to yours has been like a walk in the park. And it's interesting how those of us who have had the most privileged life can veer towards victimhood. So it's definitely a mindset. It's not so much to do with circumstance. And I remember we had this terrible tax audit, you know, where we were kind of under the microscope of the taxation department for about 2 years. And I chose to become a victim at that point. And I would regale anyone who came into my orbit, poor person, with this terrible story of how he suffered at the hands of the taxation department. And I realized when I look back on my life, how much I've grown from that place, and what an awful space it is to be in. And you bring everyone else down with you. That's the other thing.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that whole aspect of having a desire to improve, improve or grow, to keep expanding, because, you know, there's no such thing as stasis, is there? There's no such thing as a static place where we can all be comfortable, as much as we might like to believe that. The only choice we have is either to expand or contract, isn't it? You know, it's either to get bigger and bigger, or become smaller and smaller, and more blaming and more complaining and more bitter and resentful. And that's what I see as the stark choice. I'd love to hear how, in this space of perpetual, you know, growth, if you like, Don, where has that brought you to now? What are you doing with your life now? What floats your boat?
Well, one of the things that really gets me up in the morning, that really drives me, is one day I was sitting in my office and thinking about how lucky I was. I mean, I'm just really the luckiest man in the world to go from living in the worst place in the United States to becoming a CEO at 39. And at the time, I was only one of maybe 10 people in the United States who was a CEO of a public company under 40. So to take a look at that huge transition, I remember thinking about how fortunate I was to have such great mentors. And, you know, my mentors were people like the CEO of DHL, the CEO and founder of a Fortune 500 company, the CEO of Colt Manufacturing, and the co-chairman of Ernst & Young, and people like that. So I really had unbelievable personal mentoring, and I worked with these people directly. So it's not like they picked me up someplace else. So I really had very close supervision by them, or management by them, and then great mentorship. So one day when I was thinking about that, I thought, I'm going to make a list of people that I know, and it was a longer list than I expected. It was about 250 CEOs and other C-level professionals. And I made calls to them to see if they would participate if I created this platform where somebody could come and ask questions and get different answers to their questions. And our mentors, there's nobody can beat our mentors. We have the best mentors in the world. And I just know a lot of people, and I'm so lucky because of that. But that's what I did. I made this platform called Mentorship.CLUB, where we can connect these people who are wanting or needing mentorship, which is totally different than coaching and those kinds of things, but who really want mentorship, and the value it has is really tremendous.
That sounds like a wonderful resource. And I can imagine also now I'm seeing in the, you know, climate change is obviously a huge issue, and it's incredible the number of people I've spoken to and even interviewed for this podcast who are devoting themselves to that. You know, that really is the issue that they want to contribute in part to, in whatever way they can, because, you know, it's a massive problem with, as my daughter says, Clover Hogan, who's very much involved in this space, she says, you know, it's a massive problem with 7 billion solutions. And I guess that's a good way of looking at it. You know, how do you apply what you care about to this particular problem? But I can see emerging a whole generation now of young people, you know, in the, let's call them the Gen Z group, who are taking on huge responsibilities and starting up foundations and programs to create change as quickly as they can, because we know that things aren't happening nearly fast enough. And I can just see for these people, they're not going to get a coach, they're not going to hire a coach, but a mentor is probably exactly what they need to do a fast download of all the wisdom that's out there that's so badly needed. And we've got a ticking clock now that's ticking faster than it's ever ticked before, you know. We really are only seconds to midnight. So I can just see that there's such a need for this service that you provide, where people who really are in a position of agency, creating change, just need to speak to someone who's been there before, because there are so many obstacles that they have to face.
No, you're absolutely correct. And the other thing is, when you take a look at how young a lot of these people are who are new founders of businesses, that's tremendous, because even my youngest son, the amount of knowledge he's gotten compared to the amount of knowledge I had when I was his age is infinitely different.
Yeah.
So all of these people are so entrepreneurial, which is outstanding, but what they're missing is the gap between some of the experience that us, I'll include you and me in the same age group, but between our generation, even a little younger than us and a little older than us, the experiences that we've had and the mistakes that we've made and the knowledge that we have. So
Yeah.
one of the things I say all the time is die on empty. And what I mean by that is, I think it's your responsibility to pass on the knowledge you have to others. And that's what I mean by die on empty.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, don't take it with you. Once it used to be you can't take your toys with you. Now it's don't take your wisdom with you.
Right, exactly, and the knowledge.
Yeah,
Right.
and also I think yeah, wisdom's like, how would I define wisdom? It's kind of like knowledge plus emotional intelligence, isn't it? Or the intelligence that comes from experience of making lots of mistakes and blending that together. Yeah, that you can't necessarily just, you know, find online.
Exactly.
Yeah. In terms of, understanding ourselves, developing that emotional intelligence, one of the things I love to do, Don, is take people through this exercise called the Magic Triangle Quiz, which you've completed for us. And why I put this together, I'm a great lover of tools and anything that can help people get to a better understanding faster as to who they really are. Because, you know, you just talked about living in this space of trying to be the other, you know, as we all do. And then finally going, yeah, but the real me is an exclamation mark, and I'm gonna really champion that. That's me. So how do we get to that real me as fast as we can? Because it's, you know, I believe, yeah, we probably all have to have our particular dose of suffering, but does it have to take so long? You know, do we have to be in that space of suffering more than is absolutely, you know, required? So in this process where you isolate the three, let's call them core needs. So the things that if you had more of these in your life, would these three core needs would be the greatest of greatest benefit to you, make the biggest positive difference to your life. So your three core needs, at the top we have financial freedom. That's at the top of the triangle, but at the base of the triangle we have love and wellness. So Don, what I'd like to get some clarity on from you now, because each of these words means something different to different people. Every word's loaded with meaning. So tell me about love. Can you expand on that?
Sure.
By bringing more love into your life, what does that look like exactly?
Sure. Well, I'm just so lucky because my boyfriend that I had for 6 years was the first time I ever really loved somebody who I knew really loved me. And that's on a romantic basis, not I mean, my parents loved me and those kinds of things. But that was the very first time I really knew love. And so I'm so grateful for that and to him for that. And he and I even talk about that today because we still have a pretty strong bond, but it's more of a friendship bond today. Well, not more of it's a totally friendship bond. But that's what I'm really looking for is another relationship like that. So for example, in the gay world, and particularly in the men's side of the gay world, it's so easy to have sex, but to really fall in love and have a long-term relationship is difficult to get. And particularly if you're working so hard, it's really difficult to meet people and those kinds of things. And that's really what I'm talking about. So for example, I do work a lot, but I try not to let that override anything else. Some of it has to do where you live. Right now I live in Richmond, Virginia, a terrible place to live if you're a gay man. I mean, a horrible place. Now, hopefully in the very near future, I'm going to be moving up north of Philly, which is a great place to live if you're gay. But that's what I'm really looking for is just some other kind of romantic kind of love relationship and a long-term relationship. So if there's anybody out there.
That's right. Well, it's interesting, this age that we reach, isn't it, where we just want something deeper than the visceral, the physical. Right. It's really something that is, it's also just companionship, isn't it? You know, someone who's there. And I hear this from a lot of entrepreneurs, you know, a lot of female entrepreneurs who have spent their whole life, you know, proving that they could get to the top of that corporate ladder and then going, oh my God, it's up against the wrong wall, to quote that expression. You know, and now what I'm scared of is dying alone. And how do I find that person without seeming to be desperate and needy, you know? So There are a lot of people in that space. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
The next one, wellness. Tell us about that.
Well, I think that really has to do with all the health issues that I have and that I continue to have. That's really what that means is, look, like right now I'm going to have 2 major surgeries coming up, one on my eyes and the other to have knee replacements. So I beg your pardon. So my hope is just that it all goes well. Right now I've got an issue that they really can't identify, but hopefully we'll identify it here in the near future. So that's what I'm talking about when I was talking about wellness, kind of the health aspects.
Okay. And we could expand on that also, wellness in terms of other areas. Would these be needs as well, Don, emotional, spiritual wellness, or do you feel you're already there? I just want to get clear on that.
Yeah, I think emotionally and mentally and spiritually, I'm in good shape. I really feel comfortable in those areas. It's more in the relationship side.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, excellent. Just wanted to check in. And then
I'm so sorry. And I beg your pardon. The other reason I think that is look, I know, and I've known for a long time, I'm not going to have a normal lifespan, but I can still live another maybe 15, 20 years, so I want to at least be able to have good wellness to live those years that I have left.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you, of all people, know what it's like to have that wellness taken away. So I can really appreciate that's a genuine need. And then the final one, the one that's at the top of the triangle, financial freedom. If you could give us your definition of what that means.
Sure. Well, for the most part, when I got divorced from my ex-wife, she actually had, I made so many mistakes, but she had sole control over like 95% of our assets. And she stole them, quite honestly. So I'm essentially starting all over. I started all over, say, a year or 2 ago. But the good news is I know that I can kind of recreate some real wealth. And the financial freedom is just so I don't have to worry about where my next meal's coming from. When you get older, you clearly, I heard somebody say once, it's okay to be old and it's okay to be rich, or it's okay to be poor, but it's not okay to be old and poor, and so I just want to make sure that, I've got a house that's paid for and I've got income that feeds me, that kind of thing.
No, it's vitally important. I was watching that new documentary on Netflix about Leonard Cohen, and it was describing his life and that point where he left the monastery only to discover that his manager had sequestered all his millions, and he genuinely had not 1 cent to his name, and effectively relaunched himself because he didn't have any choice. And as a performer at the age of 75, he was making $15 million a year, which was more than he'd made in the all the years leading up to that point. So it's interesting when you have a passion and something that really, a reason to get out of bed, that can create miracles. I really do believe that. So let's look at this this triangle. So what's interesting about the triangle, as uncanny as this seems, is that the second and third core needs that sit at the base of the triangle actually are what will create what's at the top. In effect, it's like 1 + 1 = 3. So let me just explain that. So through love, now you've described love as partnership. And I would maybe expand it also, partnership, that is an absolute something that your heart really desires at this point in time. I also get from you a love of what you do. I do get a feeling that you are genuinely passionate about what you do. So what if we just broaden that definition of love to include your work as well? Because I think sometimes how we attract a partner into our life is through that moment when we are most lit up. And if it's via work or mentoring people, and someone witnesses you in that space, that's the you they fall in love with. So I feel that love of what you do is a really important component in this journey that will get you that partner ultimately. So through the love of what you do, of who you are, of self-love, and bringing those into your life, that to me feels like what's going to attract that person into your life. But regardless of that, and so we don't attach to that outcome, regardless of that, just having love in your life right now as you do through who you are and the work that you do. And that in combination with wellness, so what wellness means in the physical sense, and also energy, bringing you energy and an ability to actually, perform on a day-to-day level. Those two things are what make financial freedom ultimately possible for you, Don. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this comes from you, right? So this is
right.
This is
Completely.
coming. Yeah. This
Right.
we all know what we need to know. It's just that sometimes we
Right.
need tools to bring it to the surface. So
Right. Exactly.
So that's really your personal mission statement, which, if you want to simplify it right down, is through love and wellness, I achieved financial freedom. Now, financial freedom is where, you have the ability to create income, but it's not just money. It's like a state of prosperity, but also fulfillment in your life, which is
Correct.
true wealth, by doing what you love, and that's just
Correct.
going to keep feeding itself, basically.
Right.
So now, what's interesting about this is, how our inner self is reflected in the outer world, and this works the same way. So when you really stay true to this path, so really staying true to what you love doing and showing up in interviews like this, this is an act of love too. Your frankness and your forthrightness is you're wanting to ease suffering in others who might be where you were a few years ago, So just these acts are basically how you start to fulfill these needs. So the needs then become values. And at that point, as these core needs become values and who you are and what you stand for, these ultimately are the gifts that you have to give to others, Don. So let's look at this. Financial freedom is your why, essentially. It's why you do the work that you do. And I dare say in mentorship, it's probably helping younger people coming through the system, helping them achieve making a living doing what they love, being able to support themselves through their work. In other words, achieve financial freedom. Would that be right?
That would be absolutely correct.
Yeah. So that's really the thing that gets you out of bed, the knowledge that you're not just doing it for yourself, but for others.
Exactly.
Yeah. And without that other component, it starts to lose its meaning. So yeah, just to be clear on that. Wellness is then the what you bring to the table is wellness. And I think in this context, wellness to me feels like wellness, including those other three states. So what you bring to the table with the people who you're mentoring might be physical wellness, because the pain of not having that, but it could also be emotional, mental, and spiritual wellness, in that you're giving them the emotional support that they need to stabilize. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I never really looked at it that way, but that makes total sense. Makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah. And also you have encountered a lack of mental and emotional wellness, just, through the story you shared with us. So I always trust people who have encountered a lot of pain, because I think it's our human response to the pain is to heal it in ourselves. And the way we heal it in ourselves is to heal it in others. And so it makes sense, total sense, that that's what you would want to bring to the table, wellness on those four fronts. And then how you do it is through love of what you do and genuine love for others. And that's your how. And that's how you speak to people, the compassion in your communication, all those things. So the passion for what you do. So there you have it. That's really your inner path. And in the achieving of the inner path, you also have how you're showing up in the world. How does that resonate, Don?
Oh, it resonates very well to me. I mean, it resonates perfectly for me, I think. When you said, I love to help others and I love what I do. I've always loved what I've done. So I was so lucky because of that. But I love nothing better than to help other people. So for example, the last few Christmases, I hate to even say this because I'm not looking to pat myself on the back or anything like that, but I give my children like $100 extra. And I tell them that's just for them to give to somebody else who's in need of something, whether it's a gift or the money or the cash or whatever it is. And I wanted them to understand the feeling, how great the feeling is when you give to somebody else. And one of the best comments I got was from my youngest son. He said, "Dad, why don't you think I do that right now?" So I thought that was a nice, that was a great reflection on him.
It's very humbling having wise kids, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I'm so lucky both of my kids are very bright.
I'm sure they are. Yeah. So anyway, that's really why we call it the magic triangle, because it really speaks to your pain. And pain is, for me, it's the greatest gift, and something that we belittle. We try to stamp it out. We try to take an analgesic, literally. We are trying to anesthetize ourselves. We disallow ourselves to feel pain. And yet, when you can transmute pain into something else, that's the magic. So I totally see you doing that, Don.
Right.
Well, before we finish, I'd just like to ask you one final question, which is, there are people out there stewing in this space, a dark space of shame, guilt, fear, for whatever reason. It might be their sexual orientation, or it might be fear of being a business failure, or whatever. What do you have to say to those people who are living in the shadows? What would you say to them?
Well, and I know that because I lived in that shadow for so many years. And the other thing I would say to them is, I was never very confident in my entire life. I was really not, even though I achieved a lot of things in my life. I really, for some unknown reason, had no self-love, had no lack of confidence, except in business. I had a lot of confidence in business. And I think that's also what helped get me through. So I would say to those people, look inside yourself and be very introspective. And if you have kids, ask your kids, because that's probably the most unfiltered feedback you will get. Or ask close friends to be really honest with you. Find out what you're very good at and get your confidence from that. Because having some level of confidence in an area of your life or multiple areas of your life will really get you through so many different things. So that's one of the things I would suggest.
Well, I think that's a beautiful piece of wisdom. Thank you. And I totally agree. I'm a bit of a word nerd, and I love pulling words apart. And I think of confidence coming from the Latin with faith, fido, meaning I am faithful. And I think that's true, isn't it? It gives us faith in ourselves. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
to take that sometimes very difficult step. Don Woodring, thank you so much. And we will share in the notes how people can get in touch with you. I know there are many people who would, love the idea of having some kind of mentor in their life, and because that can really escalate them very, very quickly and catapult them to where they need to get to, maintaining their emotional and mental, spiritual, and physical health and fitness, so that they can become, the change makers that the world is really crying out for right now. So I love the work that you're doing, and I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much. And the other thing I'd love to do, Janet, is for people listening to your podcast, if they email me at the email that you're going to provide, I will give them a 30% discount on our already very reasonable prices. So all they have to do is email to me and reference your podcast, and I will give them a 30% discount.
Fantastic. So if you just heard that, I urge you to do that. There's nothing to be lost and much to be gained. And allowing people who have made so many mistakes before you to offer you a few shortcuts is a brilliant tactic. All right. Thank you, Don, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Janet. I've really enjoyed this.
You have just listened to another enlightening episode of Wake the F Up with Janet Hogan. To find out more about the breakthrough, guided way to get off the hamster wheel and seize a life of freedom and fulfillment, visit janethogan.com/podcast for access to the show notes and to learn more about Janet's breakthrough work. Just remember, finding your true path isn't potluck, it's a process. Until next time.